Hey folks, welcome back. Time to look at some more horror RPGs in our Halloween month of madness. This time we're looking at Night's Black Agents, which is a vampire spy thriller by Kenneth Hite, as you can see here. Now this game is kind of on the borderline of horror in a way, because it is a spy thriller, but it features vampires and it also has a sanity stat, so for me that puts it firmly in the horror category. It's definitely not your typical James Bond, Bourne trilogy kind of thing. The added element of vampires running the conspiracies into which you're trying to infiltrate is a big deal and completely changes the character of the game. And also, the interesting thing about the vampires in this game is that they're completely customizable. They don't have to be, your standard European legend vampire that can hypnotize you with a gaze and sucks your blood and, can't cross running water. They can be all kinds of different things, including alien, extraterrestrial beings. They could be hyperdimensional beings with different abilities. They could turn invisible or all kinds of stuff. And there's a lot of interesting aspects of that. But the main reason I wanted to show this game off after Trail of Cthulhu and Yellow King is to show that the gumshoe system itself, now not Quick Shock, but regular gumshoe, has continued to evolve. So Trail of Cthulhu came out in 2008. Night's Black Agents came out, I believe, in 2012. And there was a big increase both in production value and in the combat side of things for the gumshoe system. So it's really interesting to see how the engine and the game system underlying everything for Pelgrane evolved during those 4 years and continues to evolve now. So that's why I'm excited for the Trail of Cthulhu 2nd Edition Kickstarter, which is next month. I think some of the elements from Night's Black Agents and the free supplement for Trail of Cthulhu called the Ingredient of Elucidation that I mentioned before, which draws from this book here, will probably be implemented into the core rulebook alongside the magic rules as well. So it should be a nice little improvement without sort of losing compatibility with the old supplements for Trail of Cthulhu, which are great. But anyway, without any further ado, let's dive into this. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on the basics, because by now you know how the gumshoe system works in its generality, but we're going to look at the specific differences. First of all, note that we're looking at a full color production here. It's got a beautiful intro page here. You can see the shadow of the vampire's bloody visage there. Very nice sort of font design. So as you can see in the contents here, we have quite a lot of content. As is typical of Pelgrane, we have not a lot of pages, but there's no wasted space, really. There's just every page has dense rules, text that's clearly written. It's not overwhelming to the eye. The layout is nice, but they don't waste space on a lot of fluff. They just get right into the mechanics of everything right away. So here we get a nice introduction that introduces the 4 modes of play in this game, 2 more than in Trail of Cthulhu, which is nice. We see the extensive character building section, which goes all the way from page 9 up to page 42. Then we get into the basic rules, which will be pretty familiar from Trail of Cthulhu, but you'll notice there's a few extra bits here in combat, particularly once we get to the thriller combat rules, where we have new rules for auto fire, called shots, all kinds of sort of martial arts moves, using mooks or minions, if you like, as shields, things that you would do in a spy thriller, basically. It adds more variety and tactics to combat. And then we have a whole chapter on other dangers, which includes shock and awe, which is basically the mental damage and stability damage you would expect, like from Trail of Cthulhu or something. And then heat, which is unique to this game, and that is basically how much attention you're drawing from the local authorities. You're supposed to be doing a covert operation. If you've got too much heat, that means the local authority are kind of watching you. You're drawing attention, and that can interfere with your operations. And then we have chase scenes as well. They're just 1 page of rules, but quite a bit going on in there. Recovery improvement for your characters, and then your cool spy tools, special tactics that you can use, like tag team stuff, tradecraft. There's some really great advice for players in here. And then there's your vampire building section, where you can get your really unique vampires going, different kinds of superhuman and supernatural threats that you can throw in. So these are kind of examples of what you might use for a vampire in your campaign. Then they have vampire forms and familiars. So some vampires might be able to shapeshift, for example, into a bat or flies or whatever. And then they give you insight into how to set up a conspiracy. So the idea of the game is you set up what's called a Conspyramid, where you have different levels of the conspiracy going up to the top. So you start your infiltration down at the bottom level. You interrogate some mooks, you beat up some henchmen, you find out the next guy up in the chain, and you gradually work your way through the Conspyramid till you get to the vampires at the top, and you take them out. Then we get into some really useful, interesting background on cities and different countries. Pretty brief, just a few pages for each, but then it gives you tips on prepping a city for your own campaign, and sort of quick and dirty summaries of Bucharest, London, and Tunis, and then a more detailed look at Marseille in France. Then we got some story building tips for the GM, and then we have sample adventure, an extensive sort of list of sources. So if you want to look for inspiration in the media, then that's a good place to look. And then some addendum addenda. So these are basically your different worksheets, character sheets, Vampiramid, Conspyramid worksheets, all that kind of stuff. And finally your index. So there's a lot in this book. It's only, 230 pages or so, but there's a lot going on in here. So the introduction, they give you a nice summary here of what you basically do in the game. So throughout a typical Knights Black Agents campaign, the agents will uncover the extent of the vampire conspiracy, mapping its branches and personnel, survive attacks by the vampires or their minions and pawns, discover the vampire's weaknesses and true nature, detect and prevent ongoing and ad hoc vampire or conspiratorial operations, weaken the vampire conspiracy by striking at its main branches or key personnel, and finally, destroy the vampires at the heart of the conspiracy. Now, this could take a number of sessions, and each of these goals could provide, an individual scenario, which could last 2 or 3 sessions. So really getting all the way to the top of a vampire conspiracy could take quite a lot of time, and you could build a really interesting long-form story out of it. And then they give some advice on how to do that, going from that structure down to a story. Then they give you a breakdown of the different chapters. And finally, we get to the modes, which I think is really important. So this really has a huge impact on the flavor of the game, which mode you choose. So burn mode, this is about basically psychological damage and the cost of heroism. So they use as examples the TV shows Alias and Callan, the Bourne trilogy. So horrors drain your soul as much as they do your blood. You look into the abyss and see the abyss welcoming you in. In burn mode games, psychological damage is more intense. The actions agents must take inevitably burn away their humanity. Your stability is capped at 12 and degrades faster. Killing is never easy and never free. So you look for the burn icon, which has a little flame there in the rules for specifics. The dust setting incorporates some elements of the other aspects as well. So in dust mode, the vampires and the agents will be far more challenging and powerful in open combat. Design and encourage your players to design operations that avoid shootouts unless the team has an overwhelming positional advantage or some surprising ace in the hole. Then you have the mirror mode. So this is what they call the wilderness of mirrors, which will also, that you see that term as well in the Infinity RPG, which is a sci-fi game we'll look at in another time. Basically, this is a world of hidden agendas and shifting allegiances, and that can encourage things like player versus player conflict. So your contacts in your own team might be unreliable, or people can betray you and switch sides. So you really need to make sure that's okay with your players before you go down that route. Not a lot of players enjoy PvP or player versus player necessarily. So make sure that that's on the menu for your whole group before you head down that route. Finally, you have stakes. So these are kind of the James Bond type storylines where you're playing for extremely high stakes. The fate of the world is at stake, or a nuclear war is about to start because of the vamps actions. It's really big actions are taking place. So they have major drives that urge them forward. And so basically the drives rule is highly recommended for games in this mode. In burn mode, drives force the characters to sacrifice themselves. In mirror mode, conflicting agendas can escalate the drama. Even dust mode agents often aim higher than just getting out from under the looming threat. So again, there's overlap between these different areas. But if you're looking for a real kind of horror mode game, then try to focus on the burn mode. I think that's the best one for that because your stability is capped. Some of the superhuman type actions, the cinematic actions are not available. So your team is a little bit less robust. And so there is more of a horror aspect to it. And of course, the more you encounter horrors, the more your stability suffers. And the more you kill, the more inhuman you become. So there's a real sense of personal horror to the burn mode game. Then we get into character building. Again, this is pretty familiar stuff if you've done Trail of Cthulhu. So your investigative build points, again, will scale depending on the number of players. And your players want to make sure that between them, they cover all the investigative abilities because as per every other Gumshoe game, if you go into an investigative situation and you announce that you're using a skill and there's a clue related to that skill in the scene, you will get it automatically without a roll. So even a 1-point rating, as in Trail of Cthulhu, is worth having. It means you're really well trained in that investigative ability beyond the normal person. Additional points would be, if it's a commonly used investigative skill that you think you might use more than once in a campaign, to spend extra points to get those benefits, that you get from burning investigative points. But they only refresh once per adventure. So that could be at, 2 or 3 sessions time. You don't want to spend too many points on relatively specialized investigative abilities. So generally, it advises here you don't want to spend typically more than 3 points on any one investigative ability. So first, you choose your background, and there are options that come up in the next few pages. And you start out automatically with your network ability at 15 and your cover ability at 10. And each background package costs 6 investigative build points and 18 general ability points. So you subtract that from your totals. Then you choose investigative abilities from your remaining points in that category. And there's an optional rule as well that allows players to swap points among themselves if you want to have a tight-knit team. So a player could trade 1 investigative build point for 3 general build points from another player or vice versa. That can be useful. if you want to make sure that you have full skill coverage. Now, the list of skills, as you can see, is pretty extensive. They're divided into academic, interpersonal, and technical, and they're more focused, obviously, on the kind of skills you'd expect in a spy thriller. So the academic skills are relatively similar to what you would see in Trail of Cthulhu or something like that, but we have stuff like, criminology, we have military science, and vampirology. These are things you wouldn't see in a typical Trail of Cthulhu game. For interpersonal, we have bullshit detector, which is a great name for a skill, cop talk, flirting, negotiation, interrogation, intimidation, and tradecraft, which is for spy stuff. Under technical, we have modern sciences, which obviously weren't happening in the 1930s in Trail of Cthulhu. So we have things like cryptography, data recovery, electronic surveillance, forensic pathology, pharmacy, traffic analysis, stuff like that. Again, the skill list is tuned for the setting, but as we'll see, there's some really useful tidbits as far as the general rules and how the general abilities work that you can filch for your Trail of Cthulhu games using the suggestions and the entry of elucidation, or just by creating your own versions. Then they go into, these very useful sidebars. What investigative ability should I buy? It says, consider putting at least 1 point into each of notice and research, two broadly useful skills in almost any operation. Human terrain and urban survival are almost as handy and great fun to play. It's not unreasonable to expect every agent to have at least one interpersonal ability, even if it's just 1 point in intimidation for the shooter. So, there are certain skills, obviously, that will tend to get a lot more action in your kind of spy thriller thing. Investigative ability rating, so having even 1 point indicates you're expertly trained, practiced, and well-read. You're capable of broad leaps of intuition and brilliant insight. A higher rating still, 2 or 3 points, implies that you're one of the top people working on that subject. You might even be famous all over Europe, or at least all over Europe's shadow underground, as an authority on the topic. For investigative abilities, having 2 or 3 points means you're really at the top of your game. Now, there are 2 investigative abilities, forgery and languages, that give you more options and specific skills for more points, so you typically wouldn't buy that many points in investigative abilities, but there are mechanical reasons to buy more points in those too. There are a few other optional rules as well, depending on what you choose for your campaign, where you might spend additional points on things like familiar cities or tag team tactical benefits. Then you would choose your general abilities after this. Again, here, just check by the icons for your appropriate genre. So general abilities work as they do in Trail of Cthulhu. You're doing tests for these. They're not automatic successes. Remember, you start with 15 points in network and 10 in cover, and then you get your general build points that you can spend on whatever you want. Again, they have great tips on what to buy. All of them are important, but it says you're taking your life in your hands if you don't boost athletics, stealth, stability, and at least 1 combat ability to 5 or 6 at least. If you plan on regularly putting your character into harm's way and into combat scenes, consider boosting athletics to 8 to raise your hit threshold to 4, and 1 or more combat abilities to 8 or 10 or even higher, especially if you're using the full suite of thriller combat options. There's never such a thing as too many points in a combat ability. And they give you some tips on how good is a given rating in your general ability. So a rating of 0 is like you're as good as a civilian. A rating of 1 to 3 indicates that you were maybe it was a minor in your studies or training as an agent. 4 to 7 is solid, but not off the charts. You could probably beat a lot of professionals, but you're not like the best in the world. A rating of 8 or more means you're a dedicated badass. So even just doing normal stuff makes you look really cool and scary to observers. So, that's when the movie goes into bullet time. As mentions here, it's the kind of super badass stuff that can happen. Note here that the general abilities are limited at 55 for a dust game. In a mirror game, you have 65. The general cap is 70 to start with. From those, you deduct the 18 general points for the background you took. And general ability list is shorter, as in Trail of Cthulhu. You have athletics, conceal, cover, digital intrusion, disguise, again, this sort of spy-related stuff, driving, explosive devices, filch, gambling, hand-to-hand health, infiltration, mechanics, medic, network, piloting, preparedness, sense trouble, shooting, shrink, stability, surveillance, and weapons. Then you want to pick your MOS, which is Military Occupational Specialty. Now, not every game uses these. If you're doing a dust mode game, you don't use MOS. So once per session, you can invoke your MOS to automatically succeed at a general ability. So if your Military Operational Specialty is shooting, once per session, you can automatically hit and kill a human target. That's pretty awesome. Or if your MOS is driving, once per session you can automatically escape or intercept another car and so forth. But this will not work against supernatural challenges. You can't use your weapons MOS to automatically kill a vampire. You can't, do impossible things like, defuse a nuclear bomb with a piece of gum, like MacGyver is the example they use. It's within reason. If you're working against a human target, you can use your MOS and automatically succeed on something awesome, which is pretty cool. When you want to finish up your character, depending on your campaign mode, you do some or all of the following following to complete your character. So for most modes, you pick your source of stability. For the stakes mode, you choose your character's drive, but you can also do that for the other modes. And for the mirrors mode, you set your character's trust. So there you go. Now we get into the different backgrounds. You can create new ones, but these are kind of pre-built ones that work really well in the context of Night's Black Agents. Again, I think it's a really transferable concept to other Gumshoe games, and you will see it, in fact, pop up in other Gumshoe games that we'll look at in the future in different variations. So here, backgrounds, they have 6 points of investigative abilities and 18 points worth of general. We've got a number of different backgrounds on display here. So analyst, so these are people that kind of look for various types of intelligence picked up by spy satellites, you know, newspapers, periodicals, whatever. They crunch the numbers, they do the data. They could be people like MI5 threat analysts, Deutsche Bank econometricians, you know, deputy CIA station chiefs, things like this. And they have abilities in data recovery, languages, research, traffic analysis, or possibly as alternates, accounting, bureaucracy, criminology, history, human terrain, or military science. And their general abilities are not combat focused. They're into digital intrusion, networking, preparedness, sensing trouble, and surveillance. And you'll see that there's quite a bit of difference between these different backgrounds and how they set you up for your general ability and investigative ability spends in the following steps of character creation. They have a nice summary as well of what the backgrounds do. So analyst, you put it all together. Asset handler, you use people in the field. Bagman, you handle the money. Bang and burner, you blow it up. Black bagger, you break and enter. Cleaner, you erase your traces. Cobbler, you provide papers. Cuckoo, you pretend you're someone else. Hacker, you crack it. Investigator, you figure it out. Medic, you heal yours, you work on theirs. Mule, you get it across the border. Muscle, you hit it. Watcher, you keep your eyes on target. Wet worker, you kill it. Wheel artist, you drive it. Wire rat, you build it. That's pretty much all I need to know. But we'll look at a couple of others in a bit more detail. So the black bagger, this is a really good one. So a black bag job is FBI slang for breaking and entering, basically. So when you break into somewhere, you plant bugs or wiretap, stuff like that. And you can come from a number of different backgrounds. Like you could be a museum security specialist, a Mossad covert entry specialist, or an NSA contractor. You'll have investigative abilities in data recovery, electronic surveillance, photography, and streetwise, or possibly architecture and notice. And general abilities in conceal 2, digital intrusion, filch, and infiltration at 8, which would make you a super badass at that. Then we have, let's see, the hacker. That's a pretty good one. You're a 21st century box man, right? So you're breaking into electronic systems. You'll often need interpersonal skills for this as well, because that can often be the weak point of a secure system, is befriending somebody who can let slip information. That's what they call social engineering. So they give you that example here, like, you know, you'll have skills in cryptography, data recovery, electronic surveillance, traffic analysis, urban survival, but also human terrain, reassurance, bureaucracy. These can all help you to get information that you can use to then crack into a covert system. And as you'll note here, in the general abilities, you get digital intrusion 10. Because you got an 8+ in that, which makes you a certified badass, that also gets you automatically cryptography 1. Each ability in this game that's at an 8+, a general ability, it has what's called a cherry. And a cherry is either a special benefit that you can use during combat or during a certain situation, or can give you other bonuses, like in this case, digital intrusion 8+ gives you an automatic 1 in cryptography as well, which is really, really handy, because then you don't have to spend points on it, which is great. Then they also give some making your own background tips. I like to include the hot vampire slayer. So if you want to be Buffy, this is how you do it. You give her bullshit detector 1, flirting 1, occult studies 1, reassurance 1, vampirology 2, she knows a lot about vamps, general abilities, hand-to-hand 8, weapons 10. So she's really, really good at fighting. She knows a lot about vampires. She's flirty, and she's good at reassuring people. So that's your Buffy template if you want to use it. MI6 with license to kill, that's your James Bond. They really make sure that if you like the source material, there's something for you in here to make it easy for you to bring that on board. So then we get into the abilities, and as with Trail of Cthulhu, each investigative ability gets a load of examples of things that you can do with that one. So we'll pick something that is not available in Trail of Cthulhu. So how about criminology? You study crimes and the methods for solving crimes, from laboratory techniques to psychological profiling. So you can recall details of past art thefts, bank robberies, serial murders, and everything in between. You can plan a criminal enterprise successfully, make accurate guesses as to the upbringing and pathology of criminals or killers based on the known MO. You can predict criminals' future actions based on past behavior. You can detail or predict the organizational structure, leadership, and activities of known organized crime rings. You can note relationships between objects at a crime scene. You can transfer, take, and match fingerprints using the naked eye or software, and you're familiar with all major fingerprint databases. You can match typewritten materials to a given machine, handwriting to a known sample, tire tracks to specific models or vehicles, etc. You can bag and tag objects for forensic analysis without contamination. You can perform ballistics and gunpowder analysis of bullets or other residue. and you can perform blood and fiber tests. So there's a ton of stuff that you can do with these abilities, and it's really nice that they give you all these extensive examples, just as they do in Trail of Cthulhu, but they specifically give you some quite detailed ones here, especially for things that some people might not be familiar with, like forgery, or electronic surveillance, or data recovery. Not everybody's going to have sort of pre-existing knowledge on what those skills actually could do for you in a real-life situation, so that's really handy. So we go through the different investigation skills, and of course it notes next to them which category they fall into. And then there's a little hot tip here on getting interrogated. You know, the director is the GM in Nice Black Agents. It's a name for the GM. And so it's just advice for the director on how to avoid kind of breaking genre and breaking the game by having your characters broken and snapped in half, and, you know, they give up the whole operation. You don't want that to happen. It's not fun for everybody. So, and also, you know, how can your players resist it, for example? It gives you some useful tips on that. There's so many useful playing tips in this book, which I think is fantastic. So again, I'm not going to go into all the details of these abilities, but you can see that they give you plenty of examples of everything, along with some cool artwork. We got a skull with a bunch of nails in it. I don't know why. Some kind of weird dagger, occult-looking books with some notes, maybe in blood. Lots of cool stuff just for atmosphere. And then we have our general abilities, and this is where we get interesting. So now we have the cherries, right? So this is the new feature compared to Trail of Cthulhu. So almost every general ability has a cherry, which kicks in when the character has 8 rating points or more in it. Agents can always use that special benefit, even if their pool has dropped to 0. So it's a really, really big advantage to have a cherry. But in Dust games, only the cherries marked with the Dust icon exist. So just remember that. For most of these abilities, you'll have the major heading. So here we have athletics. And then in smaller headings, we have the cherries. So here we have a dust mode cherry, which is hard to hit. If your athletics rating is 8 or more, your hit threshold, the difficulty number your opponents use when attempting to hit you in combat, is 4, otherwise it's 3. So that applies in every mode as well as dust, is what that icon indicates. You also have thriller rules, so that an athletics rating of 8+ allows the parkour option of the thriller chase rules and the support move option on the thriller combat rules, if your campaign uses them, and the breakfall option on page 80. So the cherries can do quite a lot of stuff, right? So conceal, you can do perfect holdout. So if your conceal rating is 8 or more, you can hide a small object like a knife, detonator, phone, lockpicks, 22 pistol on your person or in your clothing that cannot be found without an x-ray or strip search, which is awesome. So here's another bit of commentary just saying, you know, athletics being high is awesome. So you should really strongly consider having athletics at 8, which, you know, then you get to use the crazy good combat maneuver jump in, which we'll see later. You can also have higher cherry branches. So if you don't want quite as much high caliber action, you want a little bit more grounded action, you could raise the cherry threshold to 12 or more. They still recommend that the athletics rating of 8 or more should still increase your hit threshold to 4. Otherwise, your agents would be too vulnerable. So we'll look through a few more of these. So cover, every player character begins with 10 free points of cover, and there's some interesting ways that that works. You can basically put points in different covers, which can get you out of different situations. Then you have digital intrusion. If you spend 8+, you'll get 1 free rating for cryptography, as we saw. Then we have disguise, which can give you a connected cover. So you can use cover pool points during play to create a connected cover identity. So basically, where a normal cover provides potential or generic access, a connected cover is, in addition, personally known to a given NPC. Then within reason, describe the nature of the NPC's previous feelings towards your new connected cover. A connected cover identity does not require a disguise test to impersonate, but you may have to disguise yourself out of character if you don't want your new cover blown. So that's pretty cool, right? So if you're in a really sticky situation, you can use your connected cover identity that you created with your cherry, and maybe that gets you out of a tough spot because you're not just appearing to be a different person than you are, you're a person who's actually known to an NPC. That could potentially help you. For driving, you get the Grand Theft Auto cherry. So you can spend 1 driving point to steal and start any standard civilian or police vehicle. Armored limousines, super luxury cars with digital keys, and other extraordinarily secure vehicles still would require an infiltration test to boost. You also get to use the Gear Devil option in the Thriller Chase rules if your campaign uses the Thriller rules. You get so many cool cherries with this stuff. So bigger bangs for explosives. You can spend 3 points from your explosive divisive pool to add an extra die of damage to an explosive charge, or 6 points to add 2 extra dice of damage. The spend does not increase the result of your die roll, however. Filching is stealing stuff. If you have filch of 8 or more, you may spend points after rolling the die, which is always good. For every 2 filch points you spend after rolling the die, you increase the die result by 1. You can't use this during a contest. You have to be doing it when you're kind of unobserved, but still, it's really, really useful. For gambling, you can have the luck of the devil. So roll a die at the beginning of each session. During that session, you may substitute a result on that die for any single die result for your agent or for anyone opposing him in a contest or combat. So that result counts as an unmodified results for purposes of e.g. critical hits or throws. So if you roll a 6 on your die at the beginning of the session, you might keep that for yourself and use it to score a strong hit. Or if you roll a 1, you could apply that to your opponent in a contest and make them lose, which is great. Hand to hand, you can get Eye of the Tiger even in dust mode. So you can spend 1 hand-to-hand pool point to assess your opponent and determine his toughness. The director will tell you if the opponent's hand-to-hand rating is within 1 point of your rating, lower than that, or higher than that. So that can help you determine, what you're facing. In Thriller rules, you can get extra attacks, martial arts, and mook shield options from the Thriller combat rules, and the breakfall option. In health, you get free 4 rating points in health at the start of the game, but you pretty much want to boost that, generally speaking. But in a Dusk game, your health rating is capped at 10. For infiltration, you have Open Sesame. So if it's 8 or more, you can automatically pick or bypass any normal commercial door lock or alarm on buildings or vehicles without a test. Otherwise, the difficulty for such a lock is 2. Many locks require specialized tools. Complex or tricky locks may still require tests to open them speedily, to avoid noise or damage, or to relock afterwards. Safes, handcuffs, security doors, and so forth always require tests of infiltration. But still, being able to open basically any normal door, commercial or otherwise, on a building or a vehicle is really, really handy. Mechanics, you get Swiss Army Prep, so you can spend mechanics pool points for preparedness tests as long as you provide a jaunty burn notice style explanation of how you repurpose this gadget or component. If your agent is present, you can even spend mechanics pool points for another agent's preparedness test to help them out if they want to, have something prepared for the situation. For medic, if you have 8 or more, you receive 1 free rating point in diagnosis, which is handy. For network, so this is your network of professional contacts. Like cover and play, you can reveal or remember the existence of a member of your network in a given city. Assign this contact his own pool of points taken from your unassigned network pool. So that could be their, give them abilities to import guns or provide false papers or, get reduced heat or whatever. So again, really, really handy. In mirror games, the director picks 1 contact per session and secretly makes 1 unmodified roll against that contact's pool. If the director's roll beats the contact's pool points, the opposition flips that contact. So they actually become a double agent, which could really screw you over. In burn games, stark psychological isolation cuts your network back. You start with a number of free points in network dependent on the number of regularly attending players. So you don't start with 15, you start with 12 if you have 2 players, but if you have 5 or more, you only have 4. In burn games, losing a contact to the opposition also costs you 1 stability or interpersonal rating point. Piloting, so you can get Grand Theft Aero. So this is basically like Grand Theft Auto, but you can grab any air or water vehicle that you can pilot. You can also create bogus flight plans or port documents to allow rapid departure, though they may still require digital intrusion to insert into the system or forgery to make sure of all the necessary stamps. If you're using the Thriller rules, you can use the Gear Devil option if you're having an air or water chase. Preparedness, so this is where you expertly anticipate the needs of any operation by packing a kit efficiently arranged with necessary gear. Special use of preparedness allows you to locate a cache of equipment stashed by you or your former agency. And if you have a rating of 8 or more, you can have retroactively prepared specific timely actions, such as a smoke bomb going off as a diversion, power suddenly being cut off in an office building, a gun smuggled in earlier and pre-positioned in the drop ceiling above you, all kinds of great stuff. So again, if you're an infiltrator, having preparedness at 8+ could be really, really useful. Sense trouble is to perceive potential hazards. So like here, the click of a safety being taken off the gun, seeing a shape across the moon, smelling the reek of a ghoul's breath, stuff like that. If you have sense trouble at 8 or more, you can use sense trouble rating, not the pool, instead of another ability to determine your order of action in a contest or combat, which is really, really handy. Shooting as well, if you're using Thriller rules, having shooting of 8+ allows extra attacks, sniping, special weapons training, suppressive fire, and techno-thriller monologue from the Thriller combat rules. If you have shrink and you have 8 or more, you receive 1 free rating point in one of bullshit detector, flattery, interrogation, or reassurance, which is awesome. Stability is basically your ability to deal with confronting stressful events, psychological difficulties, and supernatural phenomena. All characters start with stability 4 for free, but in a burn game, your stability is capped at 12. In most games, you'd want to try and increase it higher than that if you can. Then for surveillance, if you have 8 or more points, you get 1 free point of the investigative ability electronic surveillance. Finally, for weapons, if you get 8 or more, you can throw any balanced hand weapon, like a fighting knife, tomahawk, or scalpel, at a target within near range at no penalty to difficulty or damage. And if you're using Thriller rules, you also get extra attacks, martial arts, and special weapons training. So now we get into your personality and your dossier. For most modes of play, you'll need sources of stability. So this is what and who keeps you sane. You have to keep going out there and fighting horrible things. So you'll need to have a symbol. So this is some like personal item or icon that's kind of important to you. Solace, this is a human contact. Safety, this is the person and place you would flee to without thinking. So your old trainer's cabin in the Alps, your mother's home in Scotland, whatever. And if these things are destroyed, you can suffer various penalties depending on what mode you're playing in. You can use experience points to rebuild your stability if you lose a source of stability. So it's not necessarily permanent. You can find somebody else to rely upon. And you can also propose personal arcs here, which is linked to the drive aspect. So the drives are like Trail of Cthulhu. There's some reason why you're going out there and doing this horrible thing. And it's particularly useful in the high stakes games. I think you can use it in the other modes as well if you want to, and, you know, have a character arc that's strongly tied to concept. But for, you know, a James Bond level kind of high stakes campaign, you definitely want these. And the personal arc tip is really cool. So it helps you kind of together with the director build an arc for your character. And it helps sort of give them some pre-made plot hooks as well. It makes their job a bit easier. So your drives could be things like altruism, atoning for past sins, comradeship, you love solving mysteries, you got nothing else to do. You're a patriot, you're still secretly working for your old agency, getting your own back. You love programming, you love restoring things, you know, getting back into the good books of your old agency. You want to get revenge on a vampire. You're a slayer, so again, you're Buffy, basically. So once you found out that vampires exist, you made your life work to collect intel on them. So that could be another reason. Maybe you just love thrills. So you left the service and you want to help get the truth out about what's really going on, that there are vampires and horrible things out there in the world, conspiracies lurking in the night. Then there are the trust and betrayal rules, which are a little bit complicated. This is modeling variable trust within a team of agents, and this is for your Wilderness of Mirrors game. Basically, you can change trust, you can betray members of the team, and you can also have secret drives, which could cause those things to happen. But again, I'm not a big fan of PvP, so I haven't really looked at those rules in much detail. So then they want you to develop sort of a sketch of your agent's past. When did you come into the clandestine life? You know, when were you recruited? You know, what happened to drive you into that? And then why did you leave? Were you burned out, or did your cover get blown? You know, were you pushed out? Did you leave under protest or under fire? What happened? Why did you leave? And now you're doing this kind of underground shadow operation to take down the vamps. Now, the other thing that they point out here, which is pretty cool, is that the standard campaign begins with the idea that player characters discover the existence of vampires or clues pointing at them, but you can also start in media res, where basically you already know that vampires exist. So that would be your Buffy campaign, where, you know, she's already got a vampirology skill at 2, she knows they exist, but, you know, you can do it where you're starting before that point. You don't know that vampires exist yet, and you find out through the course of play, and then you can start studying them and gaining points in the vampirology skill. So then we get into the rules. Again, this is pretty much how you would expect from Trail of Cthulhu, but they're a lot clearer here about point spends and benefits, which I think is really, really handy. They give you tons of examples here for what you can get from point spends. I think that's one area that definitely will be improved in the new version of the Trail of Cthulhu rulebook. They tell you how to deal with things like inconspicuous clues, general point spends, and how they work, which again is the same as we would normally expect for simple tests. Retries, basically you can't do that unless you have some other supporting action that would increase your odds of success, and you have to spend more pool points than you did on your first try. Again, it's the same, but there are some options given in these different sidebars here. You can also do piggybacking, so basically you designate one person who takes the lead, maybe they're the best at that particular task. All of the characters pay 1 point from their relevant pools in order to gain the benefit of the leader's action. So somebody else is got infiltration 10, and you want to follow them into the building, they will break in, you all spend a point from a relevant pool, and you get to piggyback on their success of breaking into the building without having to do your own thing. That is really, really useful, and of course fits perfectly in genre. You can also cooperate, so one player will be the main actor, one will be the assister. The leader may spend any number of points and then roll a die, and the assistant can pay any number of points from the pool. All but one of the points is applied to the leader's die roll. Assisting helps, but you get kind of 1 point penalty. You can also do general tests without ability points. You just roll a die. But then there's an optional rule as well, where if you roll a 1, you know, you get into trouble, like you're trying to drive, but you wreck the vehicle. If you roll a 1 on a shooting test where you're at 0 rating, you hit a fellow agent instead of the enemy. But if you're doing a badass spy game, I wouldn't necessarily use that. When we talk about contests, for things like alertness, stealth, full contest, so where you have 2 characters against each other. Modifications for things like darkness, point spends for the opposition, so it gives you a good idea for the director, you know, how different types of enemies will spend their points depending on what kind of enemy they are. So if they're, disposable meat shields, they might not know that. They don't think of themselves that way. So they won't spend all their points in one go to do maximum damage. They'll have a build up as things get more severe, possibly. Or, animals might have a different kind of spend pattern. So again, this game is just packed with clarifications, cool tips, optional rules. There's some great chase scene tips here. So there'd be an aggressor and a defender testing a chase ability, athletics, driving, or piloting, against a difficulty number, usually 4. The pool of points in the chase ability is called the chase pool. So basically, the pursuer and the runner reveal their spend simultaneously and then roll. The results are applied to the lead. Individual successes or failures do not necessarily end the chase. The runner may opt to raise the difficulty number of the next chase ability test. So it's just an exciting way to kind of have thrilling chases where you're revealing your point spends at the same time. It's kind of like a push your luck kind of deal. And then there are different kinds of chases as well. It could be an open chase on flat ground. It could be a normal chase with hills, twists, humps, buildings, or a cramped chase in narrow streets or sour traffic. And each of those will modify what happens. The results of the 2 ability rolls will alter the lead, which changes the character of the chase. Basically, if the lead of the runner reaches 0, or below, the pursuer has won, they've caught up. If the lead reaches 10 or some other goal set by the director, then the runner has won. The pursuers have lost them, they've disappeared down some side street, and you can't find them for the remainder of the scene unless that character draws attention to them in some other way. And they give you loads of examples of cool stuff that can get in the way in different kinds of environments, like European cities and Middle Eastern bazaars and such, if you're in a chase. The whole chase rules, I think, are really great. And then they also have additional cherries as well. So thriller chase rules, they allow you to do things like attacking during chases. You can get gear devils. So once per chase, a player with a driving or piloting rating of 8 or more can gain a 3-point refresh by uttering a brief narrative description of his or her actions in transportive detail. I take the revs all the way into the red, and when I buried the tack, I throw her into fourth and scream down the straightaway. Then you get a 3-point refresh. So it adds to the role-playing flavor as well, which is pretty cool. Then they give you some examples of how you could use investigative abilities during chases. There are some exceptions for dust mode, which are intended to be more grounded. How to deal with multiple pursuers in dust mode. Parkour, which is a chase mode ability for athletics 8+. It's a cherry again. So this, allows you to parkour your way around a city to capture somebody on foot. Or you can use ramming, T-boning somebody with your car, or using a pit maneuver to spin them around, that kind of stuff. You can do sudden escape maneuvers, swerves. There's quite a bit of interesting action in chases. Now we get into combat. So one thing that this game uses a lot of is mooks. So these have health pools between 1 and 3, hit threshold of 3 or even 2, and as soon as they hit health 0, they drop. So in a lot of spy movies you see there'll be hordes of henchmen that just drop really quickly, and the big bad guy, is the one that you need to spend time worrying about. So they mirror that with the mook rules in here, except in dust mode. So any foe can be reliably assumed to have health 4 at least, and there are no mooks. So dust mode is quite more challenging. So we go through the standard basic rules. The damage dealing works the same as in Gumshoes we've come to expect. Basically, when you roll over the opponent's hit threshold, you can deal damage, so you make a damage roll, and then that's modified according to your weapon. So if you have a heavy firearm, you get +2. If you're just using your fist, you get -2, and there's everything in between. If you're at point blank range for firearms, you get an additional +2. And if you're getting a shotgun, you get an additional +1 to damage at close range as well. Supernatural creatures often exhibit alarmingly high damage modifiers. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? So armor can still reduce damage to 0, but the final damage result, assuming it's not 0, is subtracted from your opponent's health pool. When the combatant's health pool drops to 0 or less, they collapse from exhaustion or blood loss, and they can't continue fighting. You can also use tasers and stun guns. You can use first aid as well. So if you're wounded, somebody with the medic ability can spend medic points. You gain 2 health points for every medic point spent, unless you're doing it on yourself, in which case you only gain 1 point. Even with 0 points left in his medic pool, a character with medic can restore 1 health point per scene to another character or himself, so it's useful to remember. Always check the text for an ability when you're in a tough situation, because there are often these little exceptions that pop up that can really help you out in a pinch. Exhaustion, injury, and death. So if you're in a dust mode game, shootouts and firefights are a lot less survivable. So to make that the case, basically all hurt results from firearms can count as seriously wounded results. So any gunshot that drops your health pool to 0 or below does an additional +6 points of damage. Vampires and other once-human monsters don't suffer any such extra damage from gunshots, unless the director explicitly rules that they do. And then there's a commentary from the playtester here. Even outside dust mode, firearms are extremely dangerous. An agent can keep barreling through a single gunshot, but that second one will almost certainly drop him to hurt or worse. 2 or 3 mediocre gunmen concentrating their fire on a single target, which smart foes will do, can take out almost anyone. Don't give them that opportunity. So use cover, flank enemy positions, etc. And never forget the ability to jump in if you see a friend in need. Jumping in is a really, really useful rule. So then we get into player-facing combat, which is an optional rule to speed combat up when you're dealing with a bunch of mooks. We've got free-for-all combat, standard combat considerations like armor, cover, ammo capacity, range, explosives, and their damage according to the class of the explosion. Their annihilation range, damage range, and debris range. Then you have sort of example opposing forces, bodyguards, civilians, guard dogs, mafiosos, militia, police, soldiers, special ops, special police like SWAT teams, terrorists, and thugs. Then we get into the cool stuff, which is the thriller combat rules. So auto fire, to keep the story moving, the action genre typically treats fully automatic weapons fire as much less deadly than it is in real life. Characters either remain pinned down by suppressive fire or routinely outrun lines of machine gun fire, which is not realistic. Important characters are much less likely to be hit by full auto gunfire than they are by single firearm shots. Minor thugs, guards, and henchmen are more likely to be hit by auto fire. So this is modeling genre, this rule, not reality, as is with much of the book. If you score a hit with a fully automatic weapon, and the director has no narrative reason to prevent you from making an easy kill, you may then spend shooting points to do additional instances of damage to your target at a rate of 1 instance of damage per 3 additional shooting points spent. So in other words, you could spend 3 points of shooting and roll another die of damage and get your potential additional points for using a weapon as well. If additional dramatically unimportant enemies stand within 3 meters or so of your first target, you may spread out your additional instances of damage between these additional targets, so that kind of represents you sweeping your auto fire across a small area. You can also do called shots, so you'll get a modifier to hit threshold, and that ranges from, shooting on a large carried object, like a laptop, which will get a +1, or a torso, which is +1, chest would be +2, a head or a limb +2, heart, throat, mouth, or face +3, weapon or other handheld object +3, an eye +4, or a chest if they're facing away from you, it would be +4. In a dust mode game, shooting guns out of people's hands is ridiculous, but shots to heads, leg, torso, and gut still make sense, so they recommend that some of these maybe you don't use. But I think shooting guns out of people's hands is pretty awesome. There's a note here from the playtesters that some playtesters didn't notice the called shots rule, but that's basically a really important way to get more damage to a hit than the other guy. So, bulk up your hand-to-hand skill, take a called shot, and beat them down in the face, and you're going to do more damage. You can use disarm attacks as well. Disarm attack is a special kind of a called shot that targets the weapon. If you make a successful called shot to a weapon in hand, the result depends on how you did it. If you use shooting, the weapon is probably damaged and certainly knocked free. If you use weapons and your weapon is heavier, you disarm them. On an unmodified 6, you disarm your foe even if your weapon is lighter or flimsier. If used hand-to-hand, your foe cannot use that weapon against you. Instead, the two of you are wrestling for control of the weapon. If your enemy was surprised or you rolled an unmodified 6, you immediately disarm them. Critical hits, if your unmodified die roll on an attack attempt is 6, and your total result after pool expenditures are taken into account exceeds the target's hit threshold by 5 or more, you score a critical. So you roll 2 instances of damage and add them together. Pretty awesome. Then you can do evasive maneuvers. So you spend athletic points to increase your hit threshold. You can get extra attacks, which needs a combat ability of 8+, so it's a combat cherry. By pushing yourself, you can attempt more than 1 attack per round, provided that your rating is 8 or more. You can't attempt extra attacks with a heavy, unbalanced, or unwieldy melee weapon. You can spend 4 shooting plus 1 stability to immediately launch a second attack after reaching or exceeding your opponent's hit threshold. If you make an extra attack against a different target from your first attack, the second target's hit threshold increases by 2. A third target, if any, would have his hit threshold increased by 3, and so on. You can also do two-fisted firearms. Basically, you can have a pistol in each hand, and you must have a pistol in both hands at the beginning of the round to use this option. You only need to spend 3 shooting pool points plus 2 athletics in order to attack with both pistols. You name your target or targets and spend individually on each, then roll your attacks and damage separately. You can't adjust your targets or switch targets in between. If you attack 2 targets, choose one to have his hit threshold increased by 2 as per multiple targets, which is the stuff above. If you launch an extra 2-fisted pistol attack in the round, you must pay 9 shooting and 6 athletics to do so, and again, you can attack with both pistols. You can also do feints, so basically you can put your opponent off guard with false blows, so you can spend 3 hand-to-hand or weapons points to reduce the hit threshold by the number of hand-to-hand points spent. It's really handy. Jumping in is something you should do a lot. So, provided you haven't yet acted in the current round, and say that you have a coworker or colleague on your team, they're about to take a beat down, you can jump in. So you spend 4 athletics or 3 points of shooting, weapons, or hand-to-hand at the end of any other character's action to take the next action. Your next action must be an attack with the ability from which you spent the points. So basically, you see, oh my god, my friend's in trouble, so you can jump in and say shoot them to try and interrupt the enemy before they get next in the action order and potentially kill your friend, which is really, really cool, and you should do it all the time. I don't know if you need a prerequisite for that, but basically having lots of athletic points or lots of combat points lets you jump in more which is a great thing, so you should do that. If you have hand-to-hand or weapons 8+, then once per fight, you can gain a 3-point hand-to-hand or weapons refresh by giving an elegantly narrative description of his or her elegantly bone-crunching moves. With a flowing kataguruma, I try to sweep him onto my shoulder and down to the pavement. That kind of stuff. At the director's discretion, especially poetic or wincingly brutal descriptions may earn a 4-point refresh. They need to be improvised. You can prepare key phrases in advance and adapt to the situation at hand, so you don't have to worry if you're not a great improver. Mook Shield is really useful as well if you have hand-to-hand at 8+. You drag the convenient henchman or minion into the path of incoming gunfire. You spend 3 hand-to-hand points and make a hand-to-hand attack against any mook in point-blank range, or 3 hand-to-hand and 2 athletics, and then make a hand-to-hand attack against any mook. And if you succeed, all ranged attacks that miss you hit the mook instead until your next turn. The mook can't do anything about it. Additionally, the mook provides a -4 armor against incoming fire, losing 4 points of health for each bullet that hits you. Holding a mook up in front of you gives you full cover and increases your normal hit threshold by 1. You can also do smashes and throws, you can do reckless attacks, you can do sniping with shooting of 8+. You can decrease the hit threshold of a target for a single shooting attack by taking 1 round to aim. If the target is aware of your presence, his hit threshold decreases by 1. If he doesn't see you, it decreases by 2. If your sniper rifle has a scope, you may make a sniping attack at extended range without paying the normal 2-point cost. You're going to have special weapons training if you have shooting or weapons at 8+. You have special weapons training in one particular make of firearm. A light firearm carries a damage value of +1, while a heavy firearm gets +2, so you get an additional +1 to your damage. This applies not only to the particular firearm you own, but to all the weapons of that exact make. So it has to be the exact same gun. So if it's a Walther PPK, like James Bond, it always needs to be a Walther PPK. Another new cherry in Thriller Combat is supportive moves. So if you got Athletics 8+, you can use your action to execute an athletics maneuver that then places one of your comrades in a superior position. So you want to describe something cool. For example, you might use a torch, crucifix, or fixed bayonet to keep a creature at bay, while your comrade stakes it, or flamethrowers it, or shoots it. You can lure the creature into lashing out with a claw to set up your comrade's called shot on its hand. You know, lots of cool stuff that you can think of with that. Suppressive fire, again, you can use it as a cherry if you got 8+. Basically, you lay down a line of oppressive fire. Make a shooting test against difficulty determined by the approximate length of the line you're drawing. The line must be within your weapon's range. You may then maintain the line of bullets with no further effort, provided you do nothing else for either 2 rounds with a pistol, or 5 rounds using an assault rifle or machine gun. Opponents can see the line of fire, and they won't try and cross it, basically. And it gives you the length of line, which could be a doorway, a road, a 2-lane road, a 3-lane road, or hangar doors, and the appropriate difficulty that you need to pass to make that happen. You can't hit your opponents with suppressing fire. It prevents your opponents from firing directly at you, and it can prevent opponents from advancing or pursuing on you, so you can help get your friends out of dodge by throwing down suppressive fire, just like in the genre. Techno-thriller monologue is a great one, so if you've got shooting 8+, you can get a 3-point refresh by giving a brief narrative description in Clancy-esque detail. The rubber recoil pad of my Saiga SWAT shotgun bounces against my body armor as I come through the door blasting. If you love guns, you can use that to your advantage. Use your gun knowledge to get a 3-point refresh. Again, you can prepare these in advance. You don't have to improv them if you don't want to. So that's your Thriller Combat cherries, which are really, really fun. Then you have all your other dangers, so crashes, different kinds of collisions on the highway, acid, electricity, drowning, falling, with appropriate charts, break fall. So that's an ability as a cherry for athletics or hand-to-hand of 8 or higher. So you subtract 1/4 of your rating from your falling damage as you slow yourself by bouncing off walls and hit with a flowing tuck and roll. But you can't use it in dust mode, of course. They have fire, toxins like anthrax, heroin, snake venom. They give you some examples. Then we have stability tests, which work much the same as in Trail of Cthulhu. 0 to -5, you're shaken. From -6 to -11, you're shattered, which gives you a mental illness. And when you're at -12, you're incurably insane. You may commit one last crazy act, which must either be self-destructively heroic or self-destructively destructive. Or you may choose merely to gibber and drool. And the table for the type of incident and stability loss, again, is similar to Trail of Cthulhu without the mythos stuff. So you things like, discover that your friend, you've committed cannibalism. Supernatural creatures are spoken of more generally rather than Cthulhu mythos stuff. Mental illness, there's a few examples here. PTSD. You'd be addicted to something, obsessed with something, mania, paranoia, OCD, anything else. Amnesia, borderline personality, depressive disorder, multiple personalities, schizophrenia. Then we get into heat. So you can see, it's just non-stop crunch in this game. There's really, they don't waste any space at all. So the heat gain that you will get from different actions is listed in this handy table. So heat gain of 1 would be stuff like, fleeing arrest, committing arson in a deserted area. A big explosion in a industrial or lower class residential district would be heat of 2. Police involved car chase would be a 2. Then 5 is stuff like assassinating a head of state. So the effects of heat are interesting as well. So you'll need to deal with police scrutiny. If a particular jurisdiction is ill-disposed to you because of your heat in that jurisdiction, then, you know, you're going to get problems with difficulty. One thing that's interesting is that they talk about, you know, you can have different heat levels with different jurisdictions. So maybe, you know, you assassinate the head of Turkey and everybody's looking for you in Turkey, and you'll have nearby countries will be, you know, 1 level reduced. And if you get far away to China or something like that, they don't give a damn, and you can just sort of hide out without the heat on you. You can get protection if you can't escape the situation. You can also lower heat by shifting blame. There's rules here for extended chases, basically a long distance chase where you're trying to get across a border or something like that. So there's even rules for that. Then we have recovering pool points, which again works like Trail of Cthulhu. Improving your character, so at the end of each operation, each player gets 2 experience points for each session they participated in. Players who had characters die in the course of the investigation only get points for each session involving their current character. And you can then use these as build points to increase investigative or general abilities. You may acquire new abilities or bolster existing ones. Basically, you can only rebuild cover identities and network contact pools with experience points. They don't refresh, so that's an important thing to remember. You can also save build points up and use them for things like special weapons training or other special options if you're using the thriller combat rules. If you're in the world of mirrors, you can use experience points to add trust as well. Then we get to tools, so you can hand wave stuff, you can have a secret cache of cool stuff and use preparedness to get access to it, or you can buy specific things and requisition things with your funds. And depending on the type of game, you may need to do additional jobs, potentially dirty wet work to get some money to get, you know, the gear that you need. Or if you're in a high stakes game, they're going to have a, you know, some kind of steady paycheck from the CIA or the Vatican or somebody. You could have lots of high-end gear, but then this has to be the result of a dirty deal in some sort of way. Then we get into specific spy tech stuff, satellite phones, comms laser, so that's sending a message safe against jamming or interception, voice stress analyzers, explosive devices, flashbang grenades, foam explosives, booby traps, which you can set up in various different ways. Infiltration, so there's lots of potential tools for that listed here. Lockpick guns, that's a brute force lockpick. You kind of like push small metal rods into the pins and tumblers and it kind of blows the lock open, but it's not very stealthy. For surveillance, you can use acoustic gunshot sensors, which is really, I didn't even know this existed, but apparently this really is a real thing. It's on wide deployment in Afghanistan. It sits on a shoulder and weighs about 200 grams. Uses 4 external microphones, which also just detect the shock waves from passing bullets, a GPS receiver and compass, and fiendishly complex software to compute the trajectory, caliber, and origin point of any gunshot. You can filter out background noise or shots fired by nearby friendlies. So the result, the location of the enemy shooter, pops up on a small screen in 1 round. If you're using Sense Trouble to find a sniper, an AGS, acoustic gunshot sensor, adds +3 to your roll. That's amazing. I didn't know that was a real thing, but apparently it is. Some info here about bugs and bug detection as well, and how you would adjudicate that. You can use laser microphones to resolve sounds and speech inside a room. Software can filter out music or other ambient sound. You get night vision optics, penetrating radar, and then we have all different kinds of vehicles, which give you speed modifiers, which are useful for chasing, maneuver modifiers, and some special notes. So some of them have armor, like helicopter gunship or ground attack aircraft, which is pretty cool. Then you have special weapons, so you can use bows, you can do sniping with them, and they're very stealthy. Then you have dazzle lasers, so you can use that to mess up somebody's eyes when they're trying to do a shot against you. Or if you get into the eyes of somebody who's driving, then they have to make a difficulty 6 driving test to not immediately crash, which is pretty awesome. Heavy weapons, laser sights, scopes, silencers. In the real world, they're called firearm sound suppressors. In game terms, you know, to match the action genre, using a silencer makes a gun basically quiet enough to not spoil your infiltration. But in the real world, dust mode, in other words, firearm sound suppressors leave plenty of noise over for anxious neighbors. With a normal suppressor, a 9mm gunshot will be normally audible 500 meters away, can still be heard from 60 meters. So to unobtrusively shoot someone in the next room, you'd have to turn the TV up really loud, and maybe even fire through a pillow or a cushion on top of having the sound suppressor. So they're not as effective as they are in the movies by any means. But, you know, this is a cinematic game, so I wouldn't worry about it. You can also use slingshots, you can have special kinds of ammo, and there's very special weapons. But the special ammo is pretty cool, by the way. Depleted uranium, so that will get through hard targets like metal, mummified flesh, ceramic armor, etc. Dragon breath, so this is incendiary shotgun rounds. Hollow point bullets, they do more damage to unarmored targets, +1 to normal damage, and they can be hand-loaded to contain poison, mercury, silver nitrate, garlic oil, radioactive tracers, holy water, wood splinters, white phosphorus, or any other liquid or particulate. Increases all armor ratings by 1. incendiary that can contain some white phosphorus and create fire. Rubber rounds are non-lethal. They can't make anybody worse than hurt in their status. Shotgun slugs, so instead of firing pellets, shotguns can fire rifled slugs. They increase damage and range, but they don't gain the additional +1 damage at close range like shotguns do normally. Then you can get flamethrowers, flare guns, hairspray and lighter if you're a MacGyver type. Thermite, which very quickly cuts through steel or anything flammable nearby. And then you can use stuff like silver. That can be handy when you have vamps that are vulnerable to that kind of thing. Same thing with holy water. Liquid projectors and paintball guns can be interesting ways to distribute things like holy water. You can have trank guns. You know, you also might need things like steaks or garlic to deal with vampires, or special herbs like wolfsbane, or you can use wooden bullets, which can work like a stake for certain kinds of vampires. Then there are special tactics as well that you can use. So this includes things like you're using investigative abilities in the battle space. You can use human terrain to predict where the enemy will make a stand. Cryptography cracks the tactical information in encoded enemy communications. Urban survival could determine dead ends or escape routes to herd targets toward or away from them. So again, you know, they give you neat ways to use your abilities in different contexts, which is pretty cool. You can also do training flashbacks just for kicks. Tag team tactical benefits. There's loads of examples of these. The basic idea is that agents working repeatedly in the field, you can get a temporary pool of extra points in a general ability at a ratio of 3 general ability points for every 1 investigative ability point spent by the winger. So one person spends investigative ability points to get somebody a temporary pool for something else. For example, you know, you might have architecture and explosive devices, so that will help, you know, the tag team benefit will help you set the charge correctly and get a better outcome. Electronic surveillance and infiltration, locating, mapping the security systems before the break-in. You know, lots of sensible ways to combine investigative aspect with a general skill, which is pretty cool. But they also are clear about what these aren't. So these aren't sport moves or tactical fact-finding benefits or anything like that. These are a separate thing that have their own costs associated. Then we get into tradecraft. So this is basic stuff about how to be a spy. Covert communication using brush passes, in person, dead drops, hidden writing or steganography, using safe houses and covers, infiltrating an enemy network, asset handling, and you need to watch out because sometimes your assets can be flipped by the other side. Asset running, so that's if you've got an asset, you can spend tradecraft points or interpersonal points to make them do something risky for you, which is pretty cool and useful. And then mapping adversaries. So the ongoing goal of intelligence operations is to uncover the opponent's network and kind of draw the links between them so you can find your way to the top. Another way to weaken organizations can be through pressure, capture and interrogation. Truth serum in the real world is not very reliable. It's quite difficult to make it work, but in the movies it works like almost all the time. So depending on what you want to emulate, the cinema, in the media, or real life, you may want to change how truth serum works. And some great tips here about getting captured and the reasons why you may or may not want to do that. Then we got great advice for players. Always think about your drive. With great ability scores comes great responsibility. So make sure that you use your military operational specialty. If you're stuck, follow the money, get more leads, use your human intelligence, use your assets, you know, try and build a network so that you have your own resources to compete with the enemy's massive resources for the conspiracy. Always keep moving forward. Don't just abandon a scene immediately, but expect to find like one major clue per scene and then move on. So, you know, it's a game like Trail of Cthulhu. You know, you get what you need out of the situation, you move on. You know, you need to stop the cultists in Trail of Cthulhu, and here you need to stop the vamps. You know, you can't just hang around. So between the preparedness ability and the in nick of time cherry, you can assume you've done something right when you should have done it. So, you know, you can kind of fudge things that you would have done if you had thought about it for a long time and hidden guns, you know, in advance or whatever, like we saw before, which is really cool and allows the game to keep moving and those things to happen organically, but make it feel like that kind of spy thriller. Oh, well, actually, you know, Tom Cruise was super prepared in Mission Impossible 6 and did this amazing thing. Remember that you're a badass and use your badass abilities, and always know where the exit is. It's important. Lovely 2-page spread of a sniper in action here. See somebody's head popping over there. She looks pretty shocked about it. Nice art in this book. And then we get into designing the vampires. I don't want to go too much into this, just to show you basically that, you know, vampire types can be linked to different types of games, different ways. They can be, in general, supernatural, damned, which is like the traditional vampires like you might see in Buffy or something like that. They could be aliens, or they could be mutants, and it could start from an infectious disease, for example. And then you want to think about their origins, how vampirism spreads. Does it spread rapidly, slowly? How many are there in the environment generally? Are they relatively rare but super powerful, or are they relatively common but less powerful? How do they vary? Are there factions within them? How do vampires live and die? How human are they? Are they able to seduce and appeal to humans? Do they need to have kind of intermediaries who understand their peculiar proclivities in order to build up their network? And is there a cure? So can you make a vamp and unvamp? Or is it just something where you have to kill them? And they give you the basic ideas on how to build a vampire and special abilities that they can have, like armor, big health pools. They do give you the option of being a good vampire, but they highly recommend against doing that. But if you must do that, you make them relatively weak and make sure that you emphasize the downsides of being a vampire, like having to murder people to survive and not being able to be out in the sun, or whatever the downsides of being a vampire are in your campaign. Vampiric powers could include things like hyper awareness, obviously draining people either psychically or draining body heat even, or draining blood, of course, is the traditional one. They might have what are called field effects, which is things like not casting reflections, or once they've spoken to you and walked away, they slowly fade from your memory and you forget all about it, basically. They can distort time around themselves. Some of them can infect the living or dominate them using psychic powers. Some of them can go invisible, or they just can't be kept in your mind because they're sort of indescribable. Some of them have the capability of magic or mental attacks. A lot of them will have movement powers. They could maybe move really fast. They could skitter through three-dimensional space in bizarre ways, or even teleport. They could levitate. They could fly. They could tunnel through things. All kinds of possibilities here. And some of them could fly on bat wings, perhaps, you know. Some of them can raise corpses or possess people. Maybe they could regenerate. You know, there's so many interesting possibilities. They could shapeshift. They can mimic the forms of others, maybe, turn into a creature, turn into a mist, turn into a monster. They'll have abilities in stealth. And then it gives you some great a great table here for kind of superhuman feats of strength. So if you have human strength, a lot of these things are impossible. If you have superhuman strength, because you're a vampire, you would be able to do some of these things like stopping an oncoming train or throwing a bus or whatever. And vampires can also summon assistance from dark and hateful powers. Some of them might have venom. They might have voice-related powers, like mimicking the voices of others. And then, of course, they'll have to have weaknesses, otherwise they're just invincible. So typical ones would be silver, stake to the heart, sunlight, holy water, stakes, beheading. And certain things will block them from moving, like some in the old legends, vampires couldn't cross water or stuff like that. And then they give you some great sample vampires. So, yeah. Oh, and some vampires, of course, might die, but some of them can be resurrected as well. So you need to watch out for that. Yeah, then we move on to the sample vampires. So they have the Vukodlak. So they have general abilities of hand 7, health 7, shooting 5, weapons 5. They tend to lurk in ambush, so they have a stealth bonus. They have powers of drain and infravision. They can astral project. They can blight crops. If they use a vampire power to kill somebody, they get infected themselves. They can mimic a friendly voice. They can cause plague. They can turn to a rat and dig a tunnel, and they can also turn to a black eagle. Their banes are beheading, fire, silver, stake to the heart, and wolf's bane. And their compulsions are to astrally project during the eclipse and to count seeds that are dropped on the ground. They must stop and count all the seeds. So like a OCD thing. Then we have the Linnea Dracula vampire. This is kind of the classic vampire, you know, Bram Stoker style or Vampire the Masquerade style. So they have drain, infravision, regeneration, addictive bites. They can go into any place they've been invited. They have clairvoyance. They can cloak themselves in darkness. They can dominate with the gaze. They can infect, but only those who drink the vampire's blood back after they've been bitten. They can mesmerize somebody with eye contact or voice. They can climb like a spider. They have great strength. They can summon. They can turn into a bat or a wolf or a mist, and they have vampiric speed. And of course, they're vulnerable to beheading, stakes to the heart, and sunlight, which prevents all vampiric powers. Their compulsions are to kill and drain a fallen enemy, so they might stop to have a nibble and give you a chance to get away if somebody dies. And they also have alarmingly high general abilities, hand-to-hand 11, health 11, weapons 13, and hit threshold of 7, so it's tough to damage them. Alertness, stealth, and damage modifiers at +3, so very powerful. And there's a few more examples, which again, I think would be more fun to discover. And there are other superhumans as well that you might encounter, including half-vampires like Dampier, the Death Bat, the Kamazots. They are a giant bat kind of creature here. Feral vampires, a newly turned vampire that has no control over itself. Ghouls who feast on the dead. The Lamia is a female vampire with some serpentine features. She enjoys killing and draining children, so that's lovely. And she's part snake, so she can strangle you and stuff. And then she can spit venom. That's not cool. The Moroni, so it's a vampire who actually projects himself out of his grave to drain the life from his neighbors. So it's kind of spectral vampire. The Renfield. So any human servant of the vampires is a Renfield and also likely to be a dangerous killer. So they pass as human to anything except a full blood workup. They usually have a drop or two of vampire blood in their veins to seal a bargain and grant them some level of supernatural power. So they're not a full vampire. They've been promised that in return for their service at some point, but they are kind of a vampire's henchman with a little bit of vampire blood to give them a little bit of decent power. The Romans feared the Strix, who were night-flying witches in bird form. They started out as a child-killing monster and later gained vampiric traits. The Old Norse Vorthir means warder or guardian. This is an animated corpse guarding a barrow, not unlike Tolkien's barrow wights. The word became wraith in English, but using the Norse word avoids the ghostly implications of wraith. It's a very powerful undead creature, assigned to guard something of supreme importance, such as the Vampire Lord's True Crypt, the Ark of the Covenant, and look at this, Barons 13, hand-to-hand 24, health 17, weapons 12. I mean, that is nuts. Hit threshold 6, alertness +1 or +3 in their barrows, damage modifier +3 for the sword or +2 for talons, thick mummified flesh with -3 armor. All weapons do half damage after armor, firearms do only 1 point of damage, and shotguns firing shot do only 2 points of damage. They have dark vision, drain, extensible arms, psychic vampirism, regeneration, cloak of darkness, extra attacks, heat drain, magic, spider climb, stifling air, strength, tunneling, and turn to mist. Their banes are barehanded attacks and beheading, but only at -11 health, and only with their own sword. So the standard vampiric blocks for the campaign will apply to them as well. Then they get into different forms vampires can take. So bats, cats, flies, owls, rats, serpents, and wolves. And then we get into the conspiracy element. So again, you want to think about, there'll be different levels to a conspiracy, like what they do at street level, which could be, distributing drugs or guns to make money. City level power, so that'll be, corrupt cops, journalists, TV producers, city government, whatever. Provincial power above that, so, that could be a whole corrupt union, or a military base, or a secure police facility. Level 4, you'd have national level. Level 5 would be supranational, so you're getting corrupt at the level of the EU or the IMF or NATO. And then level 6, you have the vampires, so they're at the top of the Conspyramid. And so the Conspyramid looks like this. So at the top you'll have the core leadership, which will be elder vampires. Below them you'll have their blood cults. For example, maybe they use the Odessa Mafia, the Ukrainian Mafia. At the national level, they're linked to an immortal Nazi assassin and the EU Office of Cultural Affairs and the Bank of Odessa. Then they have links at the provincial level, they have links at the city level, and they then have links at the neighborhood level. So you start at the bottom of the Conspyramid and you find incidences of vampiric activity or vampiric linked activity, and you start to put the pieces together. Grab people up, you interrogate them, you gain human intelligence, move your way up to find city officials, and gradually you work your way up to the conspiracy pyramid until you get to the elders at the top and stake them or chop their heads off or whatever you need to do. It's a really fun way to show how to build an interesting long-form spy story. I think it's really great to draw up one of these. Actually, work with your players. Ask them what kind of vampires they want to fight. What kind of campaign do they want to do? They want it to be cinematic. They want it to be a long campaign. They want it to be a short barn burner, Then you can alter your conspiracy to fit that and your vampire build to fit that. And it'll end up with everybody having a great time. So, and then we get into the city background stuff, which again I'll skip because some players may be watching this and there's a lot of GM relevant stuff in here. Got some quick and dirty facts on a few cities, and then more detail on Marseille, including specific factions, a map, and here's the faction map of who's related to whom, and some plot seeds as well. And then we get some GM tips for running stories, with the particular tip to go cinematic. It's a perfect game for introducing new players to gaming. Everyone has seen spy movies, so being a secret agent seems almost natural. Embrace this and make your game as cinematic as possible. Use swooping helicopter shots, use cinematic description to get people sucked in right at the beginning of the session, and try and use the rhythm of popular spy thrillers to engage your players. So lots of hot tips like roll with it, a good tip for any GM in any genre. Say yes to coolness, rule of cool, building up the operation. What is a core clue is sometimes difficult to determine. Basically, you'll start to get a sense for it the more you play, and you kind of get accustomed to working out, what the players are following up on properly and what they're not following up on properly, and you might need to flag up early on to get players into the right mindset. Then they give you a nice skeleton for how a standard operational skeleton would work in the system. So you start out with a hook, so an event, problem, or opportunity that attracts the agents. So opening with a fight scene could be a good example. Could be something like the vampires threatening an asset of the agents or making some move that catches their attention. Then you get the curtain. You check out the hook based on your suspicions, and you get a core clue but no confirmation of your suspicions. So you might get, some kind of response from the opposition. You might begin pushing on some weak points in the potential conspiracy. You might get into a chase with somebody. Then you get the wake up. So you'll get a jolt of horror. So a mangled victim, or you get attacked by vampiric forces and have to run back. Then you'll get the stall. So one line of inquiry goes cold and often dead. This is an optional element, and typically used for B plots. If characters are investigating two directions, one of them will turn out to be a red herring or a dead lead. Then you get the first reveal. So after the wake up happens, that'll really get you motivated to look for more investigative leads, start doing more surveillance or infiltration. Then you move on to the blowback. So the antagonist will realize that you're working against them, and they'll push back. So they might threaten or kidnap someone you care about. They might assassinate or attempt to assassinate somebody. There might be a thriller chase. Then there'll be a twist. Maybe somebody switched sides, or the agents start developing a strike on the vampires because they've got a shocking revelation. And then you get the relief. You get unexpected aid or information. You'll break a contact. An enemy of the vampires offers to help you with intel or muscle. Your network contacts will come through with some really good intel. The vampires go too far, basically killing somebody that they shouldn't have. And then finally you work out what's really going on, and you'll then set up the final action to take them out in the big confrontation where you clash with the forces of evil. It's a really, really helpful way to think about planning an operation and adding structural flexibility through floating events, namely the stall, where a lead turns cold, blowback, which is when the antagonists fight back against you, and relief, which is like, getting these little hot tips from networks and so on. You can put those anywhere in an operation, and just to mix things up so that not every operation feels the same. There's loads of great GM tips in here that help you to build your own operations. And also you can do a kind of reactive design where basically when your agents do something, you have somebody in the Conspyramid do something opposite. And then we have an example of a Conspyramid here. So, there might be some shadow agents at the bottom level. There'll be, this is a dramatic response algorithm for the vampires. So guiding their reactions to the agents' assault on their security and their plans. Creates a more natural seeming story than just a storm of attacks or weird inanition. It helps drive the narrative along an organic arc. So the vampire's response begins with any one of the options on row 1. So you pick one of these options, like maybe they have a shadow agent, or they offer a payoff, or they do a kind of probing attack to see how tough you are. From that option, the lines lead toward the most natural escalations. A conspiracy that begins with an attempt to frame an agent will likely move into killing the agent's enemy, or isolating the agent from his allies. The further you get towards the top of the Conspyramid, as your investigation proceeds, then the response will get more severe. So they might hunt an agent with a Camazotz, lure an agent to fight the Vorthir, the guardian vampire, or the vampire lord will just try and kill somebody. So it's really cool. Again, they give you these mechanically backed ways to build an organic story that responds to your player's actions, but really feels like, you set lots of cool stuff up for them. And it's all very naturalistic and in genre. You can also do alternative versions of the basic campaign. So if you want to do James Bond stuff, just get rid of the vampires. Just spies, mafiosi, and terrorists. Dunwich Sanction. So maybe this is like the laundry novels, Basically, instead of vampires, you have Lovecraftian stuff, and you can borrow things from Trail of Cthulhu and sort of cross over elements of that game. You can add in special assets. So these would be additional supernatural elements like necrophony, so being able to talk to the dead, remote viewing, other Gumshoe powers from other Gumshoe games like seeing auras, motion control, entering dreams. You can do so much with this framework game. And then we have our sample adventure, which I will happily skip over. And yeah, ultimately, it's a really fantastic evolution of the system. They give you so many useful examples of everything. I think they do a much better job of explaining what Gumshoe is about and what it can really do at its best than the original Trail of Cthulhu did. Now, I love Trail of Cthulhu, don't get me wrong, but I think this book really steps things up as far as the explanation. The level of examples is just superb. There's so many useful bits and hints and tips for GMs and players alike. Now, before we close this off, I'd just like to say I will cover these bits in more detail in a future video, but just to say, if you are going to pick up this book, I would highly recommend getting as well the GM screen, which you'll also see is a big upgrade from the Trail of Cthulhu one. It's beautiful hardcover stock, and it's also 4 panels because you got more stuff to worry about. So you got things there about your cover, thriller combat moves, chase and car crashes and stuff, stability loss, and different agent actions and the relevant heat gain. So very much customized for Night's Black agents, and it has a very cool artwork with the various stages of investigation here, and a pretty terrifying vampire right there. Look at that guy. So definitely get that. Of course, as per usual with Pelgrane, it comes with a wonderful resource guide. as well, which has lots of useful tips for directors. So again, I'm not going to talk about it now, but we'll look at it in a future video. The other thing that I think is essential, particularly if your players are gearheads or if they love the combat action sequences, Double Tap, this 128-page supplement, is a must-buy. It's about £20 in the UK, so I suspect about $25 or $30 in the US. Oh yeah, $24.95, there you go. Basically, this has loads more of everything. So there's more general abilities, 25 new cherries, 20 new maneuvers, 60 achievements to add flavor, focus, and flexibility, adaptive tradecraft rules, loads of specific weapons, adapting the thriller chase rules to hacking, sneak, and tracking, manhunt rules, 26 cameos, and 26 establishing shots for directors, new supernatural creatures, and Conspyramid models war within a conspiracy, tips for solo agent play, and variant builds for the Victorian era, World War II, or the depths of the Cold War. I mean, really, there's so much good stuff in here. If you really want your players to have maximum action fun, it's a must get. And if you have any gun nuts, you know, for some reason in your group, then definitely get this. But also, there's great stuff in here for the director as well, with the NPC profiles and additional bad guys. So that is Night's Black Agents. In a quick summary, again, sorry for the reflections. Everything from Pelgrane is really shiny. But yeah, it's a fantastic game. The horror elements are there. The sanity loss elements are there. But they take things much, much further in terms of the thriller aspects, the combat aspects of Gumshoe. And as you can see, the production values are higher than the original Trail of Cthulhu. So I hope we'll see that again with the new Kickstarter coming up. So after this, we're going to look at the final Pelgrane Press entry for this month. I know it's been a lot of Pelgrane Press, but I bought a lot of other stuff recently, so you just have to deal with it. Next will be Fall of Delta Green, and after that, I will show you my favorite horror game of all time on Halloween itself. So look forward to that. In the meantime, take care, stay sane as much as possible, and please leave a comment, leave a like if you can, or subscribe on your way out. I hope to see you in the comment section in the next video. So, all right, take care, and bye-bye.